Well, hello and happy 2025, everyone. Welcome to our first Law Society of Nunavut CLE presentation for 2025. If you are interested in our other offerings, there are numerous that are recorded and available on the website, and we will have other live offerings throughout the year. My name is Rebecca Jaremko-Bromwich, and I am working with the Law Society of Nunavut on programming the CLE. And I am very happy and very pleased to be able to introduce to you today Amy Salazin, who teaches at the University of Ottawa Law School. And she's going to be speaking about AI, artificial intelligence, and legal practice. What do we need to know? And this is a follow-up to a presentation that Professor Salazin did last fall that was very well received. So without further ado, I will pass this over to Professor Salazin.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. And thanks to the Law Society of Nunavut and also for you all being here today for the webinar. As you can see from the screen, the topic today is AI and legal practice. Just get my slides going here. In terms of the plan, there is about an hour booked for this session. I don't intend to talk to you for the full time. Noting we're getting some feedback from maybe some of the participants. If people want to mute their mics, thanks. In terms of the ground I'm hoping to cover, begin kind of at the beginning, setting some groundwork, talking about kind of what is AI, and then getting more particular, talking about, what are some of the trends we're seeing when it comes to AI and legal practice. Third, kind of getting into some of the ethical issues that arise and even some of the bigger picture questions this moment of AI raises for us. I thought first, I've done this presentation before. There may be some people new to this content. So I thought first, maybe we can hear a bit from the audience in terms of where they're coming to some of these questions from. If people want to, they can open on their computer or phone a website called menti.com. And I'll put up some polls in a few seconds here and get a bit of a better understanding of how people are thinking about this issue. The first poll says, what word or phrase comes to your mind when you see or hear the term AI? Hopefully people see that on their screen. You will see a code in the upper top of the slide, the code you need to put in to access the poll. And I'm hoping it's working. Someone can let me know, maybe with a thumbs up, if it seems to be coming up on their screen. I'll give people a few moments. Maybe get a thumbs up from anybody that's been able to access it. Okay, I'll see if people were able to put anything in. Oh, I see something in the chat here. Thanks. Great, thanks, that's helpful. Maybe people weren't able to give a thumbs up. So people want to fill in that if they haven't already. I don't want to belabor it too much. Let's see if we can get some of it's a 0 responses so far, but hopefully it's coming through with some results. We'll see. Oh, looks like it's not coming through with any results. Let's see if we can start this. Okay, so we have 2 people participating. Thank you for that. Robots and Terminator. So I'm thinking maybe about automation, thinking maybe about some references. Clippy, I love that. Someone's of my generation. Okay, I'm going to move to the next poll. People still want to log in and participate. I certainly welcome that. It's good to get a sense of where people are coming from on these questions, and hopefully I'll try and work in some references to Clippy and the Terminator and robots as we go along. The next poll here, I was just kind of trying to get a sense of where people are on this question. We'll be talking about something called generative AI today, and just wondering if people could let me know what their familiarity is with the concept. Maybe you've never heard of it, know a little, know a fair amount. Again, this is your self-assessment. Okay. Okay, so we have some people kind of in the middle there. That's helpful to know. Okay. I'm going to keep on moving on. Thanks for participating. It gives me a bit of sense of what people are thinking about and where they're coming from. Wanted to do some of that initial polling, just because I do recognize when I talk about AI, particularly to kind of audiences of lawyers, people are coming at the issue from all different types of places. Some people on this call may have been to a lot of CLEs, maybe even the past one I've done. Some people may be a bit more new to the concept, and so I do like to begin, all my presentations with some basic content as a way of kind of setting the table, so we're all better placed to have a conversation together. So it won't be a long basic lecture, but just a few points to make sure we're kind of all on the same page. And again, maybe some of you have seen this content before, maybe some of you are new to it. So just starting at the beginning, kind of what is AI? I always kind of like to begin by noting that AI is a bit of a term of art. It's a term that's been around since the mid 1950s. So it's been used over the years in a variety of different ways. We've been talking about AI, not just since ChatGPT, but for a while. In terms of what people have said AI is, I've put a couple of popular quips up here. Some people have said AI just is whatever hasn't been done yet. Another thing I've heard say a lot is when AI works, we call it software, or when AI works, we stop calling it AI. This idea that once we get comfortable with new technology, we stop calling it artificial intelligence. Another simple but definition that you may have seen is AI involves using computers to do things that traditionally require human intelligence. And even some of the technical documents build in a definition that's kind of akin to that. I think in each of these definitions, you do see some commonalities, kind of a time element. AI is pictured a bit of that shifting concept, a bit of something that's futuristic, pushing our boundaries, kind of that maybe that Terminator perspective on things, something that's going to come in the future. We do have some more kind of statutory and technical definitions, particularly in recent years as we've started to see more regulation. A definition that's gaining traction globally is this OECD definition, saying that an AI system is a machine-based system that, for explicit or implicit objectives, infers from the input it receives how to generate outputs such as predictions, content, recommendations, or decisions that can influence the physical or virtual environment, noting that AI systems vary in their levels of autonomy and adaptiveness after deployment. So certainly more words in that definition and kind of more structure, but still something that's pretty flexible when you kind of look at that definition. For most of us, most of the time, having one particular definition of AI and trying to pin that down to specific words is not going to be essential. I think what's essential is having kind of what I call contextual literacy or contextual awareness. And so when you're thinking about using a tool or having to react to someone else using a particular type of tool, you have some awareness about how that type of AI works, what some of its limitations are, what some of its benefits are. And I think that's a lot more helpful than kind of trying to parse an exact dictionary definition in terms of what AI is. It sounds like from the people that I've heard from in the poll, this term generative AI is a bit familiar. This is just one subset or type of AI, generative AI. For our purposes, we can use a pretty general type of definition and basically say that generative AI refers to systems that are capable of producing content like text, images, or video. Not going to give a deep technical lecture about how this sort of technology works. But, in terms of the kind of high level points, where we start with generative AI is the taking of massive data sets. And I use the word taking intentionally. You may have seen there are various lawsuits and disputes about how these data sets are obtained, but generally you have these large amounts of data that are taken. And then you have models that work to identify patterns and structures in the data with the goal of generating new and original content. One important thing to note, and this will come up again in the presentation, is this is fundamentally, foundationally probabilistic technology. So it's predicting what words go best together. If you have an image generator, what pixels go best together. And that can be contrasted to what you might call a more rules-based or deterministic model, where you have kind of a logic tree or a set of rules that the tool will go through to arrive at kind of one particular answer. Certainly generative AI models kind of calculate the probabilities using some very, very sophisticated techniques. And again, after having just a mammoth amount of data. But I do think it's important to remember that kind of foundationally, this sort of technology is probabilistic. Now, this seems to be content I think this audience is probably familiar with. Generative AI really came onto the public's radar with the release of ChatGPT just over 2 years ago. This technology was being developed before then, but it really came on the scene in November 2022. ChatGPT isn't the only tool that uses generative AI. It's not the only free tool. Some people may be, seeing Google's Gemini, Anthropic's Claude. There's other types of tools available. ChatGPT does tend to be the most well-known tool. And I think our 3rd out of 4 polls, just wanting to know if people have used ChatGPT before. So either personally or professionally. I'll give a couple of minutes to see. No, we have at least 3 people logged into the Mentimeter. Okay. Okay. Okay, so with those 4 answers, I can see, we have a mixed crowd. That's really helpful to know. So maybe everybody may have heard of it or maybe not, but certainly not everybody's used it. And so I did do on the weekend a screen record with the most recent model of ChatGPT available. Here's what the opening screen would look like if you logged in. Depending if you subscribe or not, you get different sophistication of models. I have kind of one of the cheaper subscriptions. So I did, this is a screen record of me typing. You can see how slow I type, unfortunately. And I asked, what are some access to justice concerns that exist in Nunavut? And no pre-information was given to this tool. And you'll see quite quickly it starts producing something grammatically correct, also organizes it in different categories. I'll certainly leave it to this audience to let me know if anything might be missing. Feel free to put that in the chat, but certainly a tailored response, one that on first glance, at least to me, is catching many of the things we might talk about. I think it's ending there. Okay. And so when ChatGPT came out and people saw it could do this type of thing, it sort of blew a lot of people's minds, even people that were working in AI. Because that ability to kind of produce human sounding text, fairly sophisticated text with an easy to use tool like that wasn't really something that existed in AI before, not to that kind of level. And if we think about how much of the work of lawyers, the legal profession, involves engaging with language, parsing legislation, reading case law, drafting pleadings, drafting contracts. You can see why this new technical capacity with language could generate a lot of excitement when it comes to what it might do for the legal profession. And we certainly saw a lot of that excitement right from the get-go. Some of the early headlines were talking about how ChatGPT could perform on bar exams, how it could answer legal questions. And kind of in the first few months, a lot of that was appearing in lawyers' press, but also in mainstream press. Kind of a few months after we saw those headlines about ChatGPT's performance on legal questions, we started to get a few real-life examples of things that could go wrong if, for example, a lawyer used this kind of technology inappropriately. I don't have a poll for this, but I imagine some of you in the room may have seen this story. It was about a year and a half ago of an American lawyer who made the front page of the New York Times print edition because essentially what had happened was they'd used ChatGPT. They had a motion. They were trying to find cases that were relevant for their legal matter. ChatGPT kind of asked it a query like I just did, gave them cases that seemed directly on point. The lawyer was quite excited, thought they were going to be set up to win the case. Put those cases in their pleadings, when the lawyer got to court, opposing counsel tried to find the cases that court did. No one could find these cases. And what had happened was ChatGPT had actually given a lawyer an answer, but it included completely made up cases, had citations, but they didn't correlate to an actual case. Lawyer ended up being sanctioned, fined, and said to the court, it just didn't occur to me that this tool could make up cases. I thought it was some sort of kind of super database, and so ended up kind of being a cautionary tale. And I think this has happened several dozen more times in the U.S. over the last 2 years or so. Some of you may have seen about 6 months after that American case, we had our first reported case of a Canadian lawyer running into trouble for this. A lawyer in BC had a family law matter in December 2023 and submitted 2 cases in their pleadings that were fake cases, and the culprit was ChatGPT again. Once this was discovered, that lawyer was very apologetic, did get costs awarded against them personally, and I think the Law Society of BC did indicate publicly that they were opening an investigation. I'm not sure if that's still ongoing or not. Those sorts of problems, these kind of fictitious results, are often called hallucinations, kind of an AI parlance. Not everybody likes that term. Some people think it's too fancy. Some people just say ChatGPT lies. But the idea is that this tool can produce fake information. So people think or characterize it as having a propensity of producing fake information. Just to give you an idea about how easily this can happen, I don't have a bunch of screen records, but another thing I asked the tool this weekend to do, and again, the most recent sophisticated version of the tool, you'll see my typing again, maybe worse this time, to please list 5 recent decisions from the Nunavut Court of Justice, I think is what I said. I did ask the tool to give me citations. It says it's searching the web, suggests it's looking at CanLII. When I tried to look up those particular citation numbers, those did exist, but they didn't correspond to the case names. And it even appeared that the tool maybe had grabbed some of these case names from cases reported in the media that maybe hadn't yet been heard. It was very curious. So bottom line, at least the ones I checked, these aren't real cases. They may be citations, but not corresponding to the actual cases. And so, again, you can see that this issue of not always producing reliable information, the tool doesn't necessarily say, I can't do that for you. It'll be very willing to provide you a result. Again, this goes back to that point I made earlier about the tool being probabilistic, not deterministic. When ChatGPT is giving an output, it's not plugging into a database, going into CanLII and doing a keyword search using sort of rules-based algorithm or formulation. Again, it's producing an answer based on patterns in language. And so it's seen legal cases from the internet, it's seen citations, it knows it can gain an understanding of what those should look like. And it's very good at emulating real things. But it's not meant to be an information retrieval device in that way. Sometimes it can give you correct information, absolutely, particularly depending on what you're asking, or if it's a legal question, if it's a citation that's quite commonly known, it's going to appear a lot in its data set. But again, this is fundamentally a statistical model. So that's why some of these issues arise. Something else to know about these tools is I don't want to leave you with the impression in this beginning section that it's all about kind of bits and bytes being coded and percentages and probabilities. There is human training going into developing these tools, guardrails getting put into these tools to try and help the tools give more useful answers. Also to prevent them from engaging in what we might think are dangerous activities, like giving you instructions about how to prepare a bomb. Some of these guardrails have proven kind of problematic in the legal context because they may prevent, for example, the production of sexually explicit words or materials. Of course, our criminal justice system does have subject matter that could engage some of that. And so even in some cases, people are trying to use these tools to help them in criminal research, criminal justice research, and the tools are popping up those guardrails that weren't really designed for this context. And so that's another kind of element of the scene here. That was a super quick overview of what is AI. Again, maybe for some of you, you've heard this many times, maybe even from me. Some of you, maybe there was something new there. But again, I did want to set us up all kind of on the same page. In terms of some of the takeaways, again, AI kind of as an umbrella term is a big, somewhat flexible category. And then we can go down further and say generative AI is one type of AI. And generative AI is that which is powering ChatGPT, which is just one tool that uses this one type of AI. Pretty powerful new capacity that's demonstrated. And at the same time, there's some pretty important limitations. Just giving you an example of one. I think I've seen that something come up in the chat there. Just want to see if there's a question. Okay, so I see one question from the participants, asking, will there be a time when AI could be deterministic, like judge cases? I think you could already build a very kind of rules-based if-then system that could make judgments in cases. The tricky part is, there's a lot of discretion we built into the law and interpretation that we built into the law. And to what degree do you want to delegate those types of cases to machines? I think that's where things become more complicated, but a big question that a lot of people are working on. And, one question with these generative AI systems, one debate is, can they get to a point where they're actually reasoning? And computer scientists, very sophisticated experts, are already debating, are we seeing reasoning from these tools, or is it just statistics? So one thing we know is the tools keep on getting better. And where the ceiling is, we're not sure yet. So a very short kind of it depends answer, I think, to that question, but I think certainly one that's on people's minds. And when I train judges, one that's on their minds as well. I'm going to move us to part 2, trying to keep us on time, but certainly feel free to submit some questions to the extent I'm able to see them now. I'll try and address them. I wanted to get more now into the legal context more. I'm talking about, some trends, or what are we seeing when we talk about AI in legal practice? One thing, we're seeing is ChatGPT not necessarily being used for legal research, or maybe more high risk because of those issues of hallucinations, but seeing it being used outside of legal research. And maybe some of you in the room have used ChatGPT for other things in your legal practice. Talk to a lot of Canadian lawyers, and certainly not everybody's using ChatGPT, but for the ones I talk to, some of the things I hear about are marketing. So, a lawyer wants to write a blog or some text for their website. Some are using ChatGPT to do this. I mean, certainly if you're trying to summarize a legal case on your website, you want to make sure, you're verifying all that information, but maybe for some, basic marketing language, you can use things pretty quickly. Correspondence, help with drafting emails, routine correspondence to courts. I've heard people say that it helps with tone. If people find that maybe they're too angry, they can ask the tool to suggest better ways of expressing things. Brainstorming for all sorts of things I've heard of. Visualizing, organizing data. One lawyer I heard speak on a panel a few months ago now, said that he was needed to prepare a table or a chart and a factum that he was going to file with the court. There was some data he wanted to represent in that format, and asked the tool to give him examples of different ways of presenting that data in a chart or a table. Got a few examples, found one he liked the best, and then asked the tool to refine it. And so I thought that was a very helpful type of use case. Again, I think when we're talking about the world of AI, sometimes ChatGPT kind of gets conflated with the entirety of what's out there, because it tends to be the most prominent. But again, ChatGPT is just one tool. And people that are kind of really enthusiastic about AI in the legal services context aren't necessarily, focused on ChatGPT. They're not focused on these general public tools. Where we're seeing kind of a lot of interest, development, certainly money, is going into developing tailored tool for the legal profession. And just it's hard to overstate how much is happening and how much millions of dollars are getting poured kind of internationally into developing these sorts of tools. The use cases are quite varied. Again, here we're talking about a capacity with language, and so it can get deployed in a variety of different ways. But things like drafting materials, summarizing case law, and legal research, communication, brainstorming, all those things are included. And just to give you a visual representation of kind of that interest, development, and money I talked about, Legal Tech Hub kind of gathers and presents in this sort of graphic format some of the early stage tools that are using generative AI and things that are meant to be used in the legal services context. So we're not talking about all legal tech, not talking about all AI, but it's generative AI. And you'll see kind of, again, these icons that show use cases across a variety of sectors. When Legal Tech first produced this graphic was one page, but by last summer, they had to move to 2 pages just because there was so much development in this area. Those that are developing tailored tools, the reason they're doing this is they're trying to reduce, at the least 2 key areas of risk. Looking at helping with that trustworthiness and reliability question. And doing a variety of things to do that. I'm trying to train the tool, fine tune it. If you're in the legal research space, trying to direct the tool to only pull answers from verified legal databases of information. Confidentiality, which we'll talk about a bit later, is a huge thing for the legal profession. So thinking about ways to build those protections in. From my sense of these tools and what's been said about them, of course, they're all different, but kind of speaking generally, they're not 100% perfect at taking us to zero risk, but are making some differences. But a lot of big questions about how much risk remains. Again, what you are going to use a tool for is really going to change your risk profile. So, fully delegating a legal research memo to a tool is going to create different risks than, trying to extract information from a document versus kind of brainstorming discovery questions. So, you can't really talk about risk in a black and white way, but again, the aim of these tools are to make them easier to use for lawyers, but certainly reduce the sorts of risks that the legal profession is going to be most concerned with. In terms of maybe tools that are more familiar on the Canadian scene, this is just meant to be examples. It's not meant to be exhaustive. But people may have seen that LexisNexis and Westlaw have both kind of built in new generative AI capabilities and tools into their offerings. Clio is a practice management software some people may be familiar with, has its AI assistant. I don't know if it's launched yet or soon to launch. Spellbook in the contract space, BlueJay in the tax space. Harvey's a tool that's got a lot of attention, kind of does a variety of different types of legal tasks. Some Canadian law firms have brought these things on. I think this is our last survey question. Just wondering if people, use AI tools in their legal practice, whether it's using ChatGPT for, marketing or having experimented maybe with the newest Lexis products. I give 3 options here. Of course, they're not maybe more different things you would offer. So feel free to put things into the chat. If that's open to you. Okay. So maybe not too much use of tailored tools that I've heard so far. So we have had some surveys in Canada. They tend to be kind of limited in what they're looking at in terms of uptake. So I do think it's hard just in general to get a sense of who's exactly using these tools. I think the Canadian Bar Association may come out with new survey information soon. That'll be interesting to look at. I would say a lot of the tools I just described are meant or maybe marketed a lot at kind of big corporate law practices. Not exclusively, but those tend to be some of the bigger customers. And that's raised questions about kind of where that leaves kind of more small or medium-sized legal workplaces. and, the affordability of some of these tools are in question. Another thing that's happening, this is also kind of happening with the larger firms. Some are using some of that underlying technology to build their own tailored internal tools. So kind of not building their own models from scratch, but kind of leveraging some of that technology built and creating internal tools. And a lot of large Canadian law firms are doing this, allowing kind of their people that work there to kind of interact with internal data and things like that. Got to be a certain size to do this to kind of make it make sense generally. And that raises also some questions about the playing field here. Some of the larger players may have more data they can leverage to build tools that can provide them with more types of insights. But certainly something that's happening, and not always do we see that kind of in the media because these things are being built internally, and some law firms have kind of announced it, others haven't. Another kind of element, and one thing I always also try and mention, is that, increasingly generative AI seems to be lurking all around us. By that, it means it's my sense is it's getting embedded into kind of almost every technology that we're using. So, some of the legal research tools we're familiar with, Lexis, CanLII has its own generative AI case summaries now. Practice management tools may have these offerings. More general types of software. I know, if you use something like LinkedIn or Dropbox, they have a generative AI tab. Adobe Acrobat now wants me to try out its AI assistant every time I log in. Zoom has an AI companion. I think it popped up on this meeting for me. Keyboards are coming out that have kind of dedicated buttons to launch AI chatbots. I think this kind of increasing ubiquity is important to take note of, because I do think it does really up the ante for the legal profession in terms of us all becoming a little bit aware of the opportunities, but also risks with this sort of technology. Because it's not just going to be if you were out kind of choosing to buy the most recent fancy legal AI tool. You may see this technology getting pushed out to your desktop. Even mice, I guess mice, computer mice are getting built with AI buttons built into them as well. Of course, not everyone, but this is what's happening. And I think, again, it does put more pressure, more obligation on the legal profession to gain some kind of awareness about this technology. One positive thing that we've seen is there are more law societies coming out with guidance on kind of some of the risks and opportunities with AI. Certainly the first round of this guidance is quite general. I think that does make sense as technology is moving rapidly, but we're slowly seeing this being supplemented by more best practice documents. Also CLEs like this, I think, are a great thing law societies are doing just to try and help people get a handle of what's happening. The last point I'll make about trends is just to note this is still in many ways an ongoing story. New tools continue to be developed. The technology continues to get better. People are finding more about what the technology is good at, or conversely, what it's not good at. And so I often say, I think this generative AI plane's taken off, but we're not sure where it's going to land yet. I do think paying attention is warranted. I don't think it's going away. I think it's going to affect the courts in a variety of ways as well, whether it's deep fakes or getting AI generated submissions. And so, one thing we're trying to do at law schools is also start training the next generation to have some awareness about this technology as well. This is taking me to the end of my second session. Excuse me, I have a bit of cough today. What are some of the main points I was trying to get across in that section? Again, we do have this tremendous new capacity with important limitations that people are still working on. And I'll continue to talk about that when we talk about professional obligations, but issues of accuracy, issues of confidentiality, so important to the legal profession. Seen so much development in this area, both in the legal sector, but almost everywhere. Some broad use cases already. Some degree of mainstreaming. I don't want to overemphasize this, but still very much a dynamic area. Okay, moving into the third section here. I'm talking about professional obligations and AI. I'm someone who teaches and writes about legal ethics, so it's certainly an area of interest and concern to me. I'm not going to go through kind of all the different professional responsibility rules that might be engaged or all the kind of opportunities or ethical pitfalls today. We just have the noon hour here. I'm going to emphasize kind of on two classic intersections, two areas of professional responsibility that often come up when we talk about technology, and those are competence and confidentiality. Starting first with competence, what might the duty of competence mean when it comes to AI use by legal professionals? I think a good place to start, and this may be familiar to everybody here, but our professional rules do actually contain an explicit obligation to understand and use technology that's relevant to our practice. So not become coders, not become AI experts, but kind of a proportionate duty. And that duty is going to change depending on, what's your practice area? Where are you practicing? What do your clients require? But it is part of the baseline competence of lawyers now to, again, use and understand relevant technology. What might that mean when it comes to this generative AI that I've been talking about today? Again, I think context is really going to matter. What benefits and risks play out depending on, what use case you're contemplating and then what tool are you using to execute that use case. And so you always want to be thinking about, do you have the right task for generative AI, the right tool if you're going to use it, understand those limitations, certainly being careful not to over rely on the technology. We do have a technology that can produce things that kind of on their face can look quite impressive, but sometimes the details aren't quite where they need to be. So always kind of verifying is going to be important. And lawyers, do retain complete responsibility for what they put out there. And so, using our expert independent judgment is going to be important. Do have a few law societies that provide more details along these lines. I'm a member of the Law Society of Ontario, so kind of most familiar with the guidance there, but the guidance across the country is excellent and always good to look at different guidance. I think they focus sometimes on a little bit different things, so still have the same kind of first principles in mind. So what are some best practices? Things like creating a policy, due diligence before you're using a tool, doing things like we are today, continuing education, and then also verifying output. Kind of focus on a couple of those in a bit more detail. I do think, more and more, and this is going to depend a bit on your legal workplace, but generative AI use policies, I think, are becoming quite a good idea in most cases. One thing that's maybe a bit different about this technology is the low barriers to access. And so previously, if you had a legal workplace, if people were going to use a certain technical tool, technology, they often, only do that after the law firm, someone with decision-making authority, chose to acquire that tool and thought it was a good idea. This is different. People can generally, depending if you have kind of firewalls in place, but generally can, open up ChatGPT and start typing. And what we're seeing, not only in legal workplaces, but general, is a concern of what people call shadow AI. And a concern that, there could be individuals using these tools without the approval, without the knowledge of the people who are in management or think about best practices for the organization. And so that can create some risks. And I think that does point to the benefit of having an AI policy in place that is very clear about what people can use this technology for and not for, and why. Why is the organization concerned about this? Kind of a related reason goes back, why a workplace policy might be a good idea, goes back to that issue of ubiquity. Again, this technology may be popping up in so many different places for people in a legal workplace. It's important to understand, what are the rules here. Generally, you're not putting confidential information into those tools. When can you turn on an AI companion to a video conferencing software tool? I think it's important people have some guidance on this. And it doesn't have to be, I think, overly complicated, but just, again, building awareness and trying to build shared understandings. That Law Society of Ontario document also talked about verifying outputs. I think another key area. One thing that we are seeing, I think, now in the landscape of the tools that are getting out there are some open questions about performance. And I think it's particularly the case with some of the legal research tools. We're not at a point where we've really kind of had any types of comprehensive testing, that certainly not that everybody agrees with. But there's some initial reports that, some of these tools are producing errors, still producing hallucinations still. And again, we have had some studies out there. Some people criticize the methodology of these studies. I think in general, though, the vendors, the people making these tools do acknowledge, they aren't perfect. And I think we're still in a place where we're trying to sort out where those lines of imperfections are. And so I think, at that point, verification is going to be extremely important when you're using certain types of tools. Again, it may look like it's providing you a right answer, but it may not actually be right. Again, it's going to depend on what you're doing. And I thought this post by Jack Shepard, who's an AI expert, it's available on, I think, medium.com. You can just type in that title. It's quite helpful in thinking about this question. He notes, many use cases for AI, large language models or generative AI depend on high accuracy levels, especially if you're hoping to minimize the need for human insight. So if you ask a tool, for example, to draft a memo, there's also other, use cases where accuracy may be less important or may not be the be all or end all. For example, if you're asking the tool to point to various points in a contract or extract information that you can then actually check in that document quite easily, maybe the tool to save some time, but you're not relying on it fully to give you the information. And so, question about accuracy and how you think about verification is going to depend on what you're exactly doing. And this post by Jack Shepard, I think, provides a lot of thoughtful insights about kind of how we should be thinking about this. I'm going to move to the issue of confidentiality, also data security, kind of, we're talking about the firm's own data for the legal workplaces. AI can give rise to confidentiality concerns. Just like we had kind of the lawyer making the front page of the New York Times for using ChatGPT inappropriately, the cautionary tale here came from some engineers in Samsung, where the engineers, this was in spring 2023, were using the tool, I think, to work on some computer code and some other things, and ended up inputting some proprietary information of Samsung into the tool. Didn't really appreciate by doing so, they were compromising Samsung's ownership and also the trade secrets involved in that information. In terms of service, that ChatGPT made it very clear that that information could be used by the tool for training and for other purposes. And so ChatGPT then Samsung then very quickly came up with their workplace AI policy, and I think ended up banning staff from using ChatGPT after that data link. We do have those specialized tools that are very cognizant of the need for lawyers and legal professionals to have security measures. I think one thing I just caution here is there's just so much development in this area. Not every developer is necessarily going to be taking the same safeguards. And so, I do think, lawyers need to be doing some due diligence in terms of thinking about, is this a tool that's appropriate for me to put client confidential information into? Again, the risk is going to depend on what you're using a tool for. If you're creating kind of a holiday card, you're going to be much less concerned than if you are, again, inputting a client's data. I saw this example, or I guess tweet, or I don't know if it was a Blue Sky social media post that I saw in the fall, which I thought offered another cautionary tale about when sometimes if you're using AI and you think the risk is very low, it may be higher than you realize. This wasn't in a legal context, but essentially this person was noting that they had a Zoom meeting with a venture capitalist firm, and that firm was using one particular AI tool to record the call. And unfortunately, what that tool did was that it automatically emailed the person a transcript of that entire call, but that included private conversations after this person, Alex, was off the call, where they were talking about the deal, confidential terms and things like that. And obviously the venture capitalist firm had no idea by default it would be doing these types of things. And so, sometimes you can use something and say, so, that'd be helpful for me to have this transcript, not realizing what's going to be done with it. So be careful about default settings, always be careful about kind of any type of use. The Law Society's white paper, again, has, I think, some helpful high-level guidance about things to be thinking about. That issue of protecting privileged and confidential information is going to be key, like it always is. This is really a snapshot on some of the things to be thinking about with confidentiality and competence. I think this AI moment also brings some really interesting or pressing questions, bigger questions we might call existential questions about where we are as a legal profession. I think with this technology, as it continues to iterate and improve, and we continue to see it can do more and more of the things we traditionally kind of thought were core human tasks, whether it's, drafting or engaging in substantive analysis. I do think that raises the question, just because a tool may technically be able to do something, does it mean the tool should be doing that task? Are there tasks that should remain in human hands? Is there kind of value, and I think there is value, that lawyers bring to a lot of these tasks? And so kind of thinking about that, I think, is going to be more critical, particularly as, the private industry gets interested in developing more powerful tools and marketing those to the legal industry. Another big question that often comes up is this question of access to justice. We know, obviously, access to justice, there's a crisis in Canada. There's a lot of dire situation of people not being able to get their legal needs met. And a few different things are often talked about when it comes to AI and access to justice. And this could be a, 3-day conference or more, but I'll just talk about it maybe in 5 or 10 minutes. One narrative about AI is it may allow, lawyers to do things more efficiently, and then therefore allow lawyers to charge less to their clients, kind of passing on the cost savings. People are pretty skeptical about whether this would happen. I think, we've seen other technologies come onto the scene. We haven't necessarily seen the cost of legal services go down significantly. I think the jury's out on this one. I think there could be certain pockets or services that do become less expensive given the nature of this technology. But again, I think that there's no kind of guarantee that we're going to see a kind of a broad-based trickle down to the people that are most in need of legal services. Some law firms have talked about how they've used AI not necessarily to kind of reduce their rates, but to take on more pro bono work. So there could be some targeted uses of AI on pro bono projects, and there are people experimenting with that. So that's kind of one way a law firm could, use AI to help access to justice. We're seeing a lot of interest within access to justice organizations. So, potentially legal aid organizations or legal information organizations to think about how they might use AI to increase their capacity. I know Pro Bono Ontario has been experimenting and using different things to try and think about how it might do that. One study published last spring was quite promising, I guess, in this regard. It's an American study that conducted a month-long experiment where they had, I think, just shy of 100 legal aid professionals who were given free access to paid AI tools. In terms of productivity, 90% reported some increase in productivity, with 25% reporting a medium or significant increase in productivity after the pilot. Interesting to see if they're still using these tools. And of course, statistics, you always have to get behind the numbers to see what they actually mean. But, some promise there, I would say, is fair to say. Another big part of the conversation is kind of moving away from lawyers using technology or legal organizations What about the public using technology kind of directly? We know we have a large number of self-represented litigants in our system, for example. Like a lot of what I've talked about already today, I don't think there's kind of one simplistic story to tell about this. Some people worry, and I think for good reason, that, as we see more technology come on the scene, it might make things worse. Where you have members of the public maybe have access to a free tool like ChatGPT, then wealthy litigants or large law firms have access to some more powerful tools. And the worry there is, will we just see the gap widen in terms of differential access? Obviously, there's the digital divide. Not everybody, and certainly not always the most marginalized groups, will have the digital literacy to kind of use some more advanced tools. So, or maybe not even access to the hardware. So, how is all this going to help them? Big questions about that. On the other hand, I think, there are people who are more optimistic. They look at this huge amount of unmet legal need. They see the technology getting better at a fast rate, more accessible. And, is there a possibility that we can create some reliable public tools, maybe not to do everything, but maybe to help out a little bit? And that's been a question that's been asked most certainly. And beyond, ChatGPT, we have seen some developments in Canada and also elsewhere. And I see a question about what's an SRL. Thanks for asking that question. Sorry about that. I was trying not to use technical terms, but I've fallen into that. An SRL is just short form for a self-represented litigant. And so that's meant to refer to someone who is in the court system, but is not represented by a lawyer. Sometimes that's their own choice. Oftentimes they're forced to do that because they can't afford a lawyer. And certainly in areas like family law, we have often a very high portion of SRLs. Thanks for that question, a really good one. Please, at any point, if I'm using any terms that aren't familiar, please feel free to ask. And again, I'll try and see the chats when they come through. So an example of kind of one organization that's looked to help people in Canada is a People's Law School. So that's a nonprofit in British Columbia. And they have a webpage with a lot of sorts of legal information, kind of for everyday legal needs, like landlord and tenant, consumer. I'm missing a bunch. They have developed a chat bot using some of the technology that's behind ChatGPT. But they've done a lot of training for their chatbot and put some guardrails in place to try and get the chatbot to only give people answers based on their verified information on their webpage. And you can try it out if you just go to People's Law School or type on Beagle Plus. Generally, I think I've had a chance to try it out. It works quite well. I know People's Law School has been kind of verifying after the fact all the answers given out and are quite happy. Found it's not always perfect, but the errors are quite low. And when they do identify errors, they attempt to change the tool so those errors don't repeat. And so it's a way for people to, ask a question about legal information in plain language and get a result, rather than having to click through an entire web page and kind of look through sublists and stuff like that. So that's an example of something people are trying. It's not making an AI lawyer for somebody who can do everything, but it's helping one area of need. Just moving through, I'm looking at the time here. CanLII, and that's a free website that is, I guess, generally sponsored by the law societies and has legal cases on it. I'm doing some small things with AI, like creating AI generated case summaries. Moved to various provinces and territories. I don't think Nunavut yet, but one way to kind of help people parse through complex cases by providing summarization. Talking about different narratives about access to justice, one area or one narrative that's out there is, given all this unmet legal need, if we get to a place where AI actually is useful and everybody's using it, will we see kind of a flood of cases to the courts, people that haven't been able to access courts before? And are courts going to be prepared for this? I don't think we're seeing this happen yet. If it does happen, I think we're going to see more pressure on courts themselves to adopt AI solutions. And so I think that could be an interesting question. last few slides here as we're in some of the final minutes. Leave you some parting thoughts. I guess first a parting video, which I hope you'll get the audio on.
What is this? It's Microsoft Excel. Now hold still, I'm about to perform a miracle. You're crazy, there's
Just
no
in case people aren't
time.
hearing it,
Wilson just wants
this
to
is a
see,
video
right?
from the beginning and when
First
Microsoft
we put
Excel
names in
was
tours.
being released to the public.
Tennis, golf, Safari. Total. Right. Q1, Q2 ought to do it. She wants to see a 10% growth? Yeah. I'll work up the first 2 quarters.
I got it. I got it. We could tell her that you got mugged on Friday night. Nah, she'd want a police report.
Click on the auto sum?
Hey, you only have 2 quarters here. Aren't you going to finish it?
No, but Microsoft Excel is. Watch this. It's called autofill. It's going to finish the table for me. I just drag this little cross as far as I want the data extended. Check it out. Excel picks up on trends, totals, quarters, dates, and does the projections for me.
My spreadsheet doesn't do that. Very cool. Autofill.
Okay, maybe some people had difficulty seeing the video. It did play on my screen here. I never know what people are seeing, but essentially it was a video from Microsoft Excel in the 1990s where people were expressing amazement about a new tool that could, for example, do calculations automatically. And I included that video, just because it strikes me as helpful to recognize in some ways we've been here before. The professions, including the legal profession, have encountered some pretty powerful technologies being introduced in their lifetime, computers, the internet. And certainly the profession survived as a result and been able to incorporate these new tools into their practice. And I think AI, it brings some new challenges, but we've been here before in a variety of ways. Thinking ahead to the future, I certainly don't call myself a futurist and don't attempt to predict the future. There's a common quip about technology that people tend to overestimate the technology in the short term, but underestimate its impact in the long term. There's probably some truth to that when it comes to AI. I think there are some real opportunities here. I think for all of us engaged in the justice sector, I think we do also need to be careful to foster responsible uses of AI. And so what I always encourage people to do is kind of bring a curiosity mindset to this. What might be possible? At the same time, I think keeping your cautious, critical eye on the page is also important. Not only for kind of, discerning what's going to be useful potentially to you, what is going to be useful to the justice system as well. I've arrived at the end of my presentation. Before I mute the microphone, just a few final thoughts. I do think, and I always try and encourage, everybody I talk to take some agency kind of in scrutinizing how technology gets incorporated into our lives. For lawyers, that's going to be, how it gets incorporated into the justice system. I think in order to kind of be in a place to do that, education is important. Understanding, basically what are these technologies? How do they operate? What are some of the ethical and practical issues? And so on that kind of educative mindset, I leave you with this final quote from Janice Clark, who says, while the law has a long and distinguished past as a learned profession, only in the past decades has it become clear that law must also be a learning profession. So for those of you that are in law, I wish you the best in your continuing learning journeys. I'm really grateful to be able to have this time with you today. I've probably spoken for longer than I intended, so we may not have too much time for questions. I'll leave that with Rebecca, but feel free to engage with me on LinkedIn if you use that, or also by email, Amy Salzin at the University of Ottawa. And thanks for your time again.
Thank you so much, Amy. I think we are at the end of the hour, so we'll probably have to wrap up here, but thank you so much for providing your contact information and for the very comprehensive and interesting presentation. Lots to think about in the future. I know that my love affair with Excel is not that hot, so it's funny that you showed that video. There's a certain ambivalence towards that. And I also thank you for being our opportunity to watch you instead of some other global event that's happening right now.
There you go. I didn't
connect
until today what was happening. Yeah. Well, thanks for
thank
joining
you
me
again. And thanks everybody.
Take care, everyone.
Okay,
Bye.
bye.